I I know. Might as well spread out as we can.
It's just to get rid of the starting. Good evening, Mr. Chair. I didn't see.
Oh, that's right. We went back. Yeah. Thank you.
Mhm.
Calling this meeting to order of the May 9th, 2024 Lexington Planning Commission at 5 p.m. in the Rockbridge County Administrative Offices. We have all commissioners present, save Mary Stuart Harlow. And I would ask then, do we have any thoughts on the agenda?
I move that we approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay, the minutes from April 25th.
I move to approve the minutes as presented and
I-
note that at adjournment, much to the dismay of all those present, Pat Bradley announced he would not continue. And much to the dismay, we are all dismayed. I
Oh,
would like
no,
to emphasize
dismay.
that as we approve these minutes.
But that is not in addition to the minutes. That's
No,
just
no,
a
that
comment on
may-
them.
I'm just
Okay.
emphasizing a point in the
Okay.
minute.
Thank you.
I do have a small amendment or change, correction.
Well, okay, should we let this die for lack of a second?
Yes, yes, and especially since it was saying nothing, not something nice about them.
On, let's see, page 2 of the minutes, in the staff report, the line that starts with the word "to address," missing middle housing, types of housing that are not been allowed should be have not been. If the line that's in section 1, you got it? Thank you.
All right, then. A motion.
I move to accept the minutes as amended.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, all opposed? Okay, good. Citizens' comments on matters not on the agenda. Please form a single file line. Seeing no single file line, we will close the citizens' comment period and move on to our one matter of new business. Zoning ordinance amendment 2024-03, discussion of cottage housing. We are not voting or deciding anything tonight. Arnie will give us a staff report, and it will kind of be up to us to decide how far ranging we want our conversation to go, how far we want to get into the weeds and on some of these, and also whether this is the direction we want to go with what Arnie's going to be presenting to us in terms of models of sample ordinances. Okay, so we'll turn it over to Arnie.
During your last meeting, you had a presentation, a quick overview of what cottage housing is. And it seems like we want to go forward because that does meet one of our strategies in our comprehensive plan. Provided you with this tonight, just sort of to keep in mind what it is we're working towards. Again, these are smaller units. They're at a higher density. They typically have the parking off to the side, have a common space in the middle of the property that is utilized by everyone. And they are intended to foster a sense of community and security to some degree. So again, that's just your visual reminder of what we're generally working towards. The other thing that I thought might be helpful, I'm not going to really get into it, but a pretty good article about a cottage housing development that was called the Railroad Flats. It's up in Falls Church. And if you flip over to page 3, this is a leftover sort of infill parcel, very oddly shaped triangle, but we're able to utilize it for cottage housing. Along that northern property boundary is an old rail yard or railroad that was converted to a trail. So it's actually a nice amenity to be right along the trail in a nice cottage house. So that's just a little bit of a lead in. I also provided you a link to the Falls Church regulations for cottage housing, and I had that printed out tonight in case we get that far, or if you wanted to delve into that tonight in comparison to what we're really going to get into, which is the version that we have from Winchester. Just for, I'm going to go just as a quick overview, nothing structured. Please interrupt me. What I'm trying to get, hopefully, is an understanding of what your preferences are, not so much for density right away or any of the specifics, just for structure. And then I think when we go through these, we'll just start picking up little elements of what we sort of like and what we don't like. And if you see something that is just a red flag and something that you prefer not to have in our code, please let me know that as well. So it's going to go through and hit the highlights, really hitting the headings for each section, and not necessarily going to read through each one of them. And again, please interrupt me as you feel you need to, or if you have questions. So purpose and intent section, and I'm now on page 6 of the overall packet. And this is very similar. Mind you, this is a fairly wordy or lengthy intent section. We had a similar intent section when we did accessory dwelling units, just to give folks an idea of what it was that we were trying to accomplish with accessory dwelling units. And that's exactly what they're trying to do here. Anything in there that may perhaps causes heartburn or may not be palatable here. And again, we don't have to wordsmith this tonight. It's just the idea of, do we want to include a purpose and intent section as we did with accessory dwelling units, just to utilize that as the most recent example? And then if so, is there anything in particular that's not included here, or perhaps something that is included here that you would prefer not to have?
I think we should definitely. I think we should have the purpose statement. I think it was very helpful. This one in particular was very helpful.
Arnie, I do have a question on C. I just wrote in the margin how. It's,
I'm not going to have all the answers.
no, I know you're
Because
not.
just to say, because
It's okay, actually. I take it back. It's fine.
not having implemented this ordinance, there are going to be some things such as you can achieve higher density through a conditional use permit or through a planned development. So there are going to be a couple of items in here that I'm simply not going to have the answer as to why they and how they implemented it, but sort of just as an overview is what we're going to do tonight. And then if you have those specific questions, I can definitely go back through their ordinance and get the answers to those questions. The applicability is pretty straightforward. They're just referencing other sections of the code, the general provisions, or when they're doing site plan, then if obviously these have to go through a site plan, so they're just referencing the standards that they have for site plans. I don't know why there was so much space there. Going over to page 8. I think it's always helpful to have a table like this for folks that are interested in developing a cottage housing community, to be able to quickly see how many units, what zoning districts, minimum lot size, that type of thing. I also have noted on mine, because I did a quick search this afternoon to see which of these zoning districts they're allowed, permitted by right, and then conditional use. It was a little bit harder through their particular zoning ordinance to figure out what was by right, but I can tell you that the second row there, the high density residential, that is a conditional use permit in Winchester, as is the next one, the HR-1, the limited high density residential, and the last one, so the medium density residential. So just casually looking at that, the central business district and the residential business district, not that I can tell you what the difference is between those two, that did not seem to at least quickly be a conditional use permit. And I'm going to presume at this time that it's a by right.
They were all conditional use. Well, I'll let you finish this section and then ask the question.
So are we going to do you want us to ask questions about this table now or hold?
Go right ahead.
No, okay. In our case, one of the things that we need to think about early on is what are the equivalent zoning districts that we're talking about here?
Yeah.
Before we get too far down the road.
Mhm.
I think we learned that in the planned unit development efforts we're doing.
Yeah.
And then, you did a nice job in the presentation of giving us some sense of scale, you know, when we're talking about lot size and the number of units. And, and an interesting point came up in our discussion. I think Gladys asked it, what's the difference between this and a PUD? And in our case, the PUD is 3 acres minimum. So I was just poking around using these numbers here, and that the Randolph Street is 18,295 square feet, the lot up on that we were talking about. So that could accommodate quite a few units. And I think it's interesting for us as we go through and just start to understand the spatial scale of this. What it means is, are we going to go with 2,000 square feet per cottage unit or 1,600 feet? Because I think that is important in establishing the opportunities for infill, which is what we're trying to do, I think.
I have a question. Arnie, excuse me. Do you know approximately the size of the lot, the only one that you've gotten a little interest in doing over on Walker Street and
Don't recall if I printed out.
I wrote it down
presentation.
today.
did
It-
you?
Yeah, it's 0.56 acres, so it's 24,393 square feet.
So what would be allowed right now on that? What, if we didn't have cottage housing?
If I'm not mistaken, there are 2 lots there, so I'm not sure if
Okay,
that
I just took that
0.56
off,
grabbed the one on the corner and the one that Max also owns, which is a smaller parcel. So I think it's around 3/4 of an acre total,
Okay.
roughly. So the lot on the corner, which is about half an acre, it is in R1 zone district. Sorry, both of them are in the R1. A 2-family dwelling is allowed there, so a duplex or a main and accessory, depending on how you arrange them, either through a conditional use permit or by right.
But
Hmm.
the minimum lot size for a one family dwelling in R1 is at 8,000 square feet. And for a 2-family, it's, I think, 12,000 square feet. Is that right?
But the question, those 2 lots are already existing in the R1. So I think the question was what is allowed on the 2 lots that are existing today,
Right.
to that then be a comparison to what we might allow through this, if
you
I
saying
understood correctly the question.
That area that's being cleared right now is 2 separate
It's 2
parcels.
lots currently.
But
There's
if
a
he were-
larger
Yeah.
lot at the corner, which is about, John, you say 0.56?
Mhm.
And I think total with the 2 together, it's about 3/4, if I remember correctly. And I did not print out my presentation from the last meeting, so I don't have that in front of me where those lot sizes and square footages were provided. But each of those lots, because they're in R1, allows a 2-family dwelling or a main and accessory. And if it's a detached accessory, obviously it's a conditional use permit.
But I guess what I was getting at is if you redo the boundary lines, you start fresh and just say,
Yeah.
so take the half acre for instance. So you said that's 24,300 square feet. So you could do
One.
2 duplexes or 3 single-family houses as our zoning is now.
Right.
So because I think that's what you're getting at
I'm
is
trying to
the
figure out
density
if it-
question is,
What
like,
would be allowed? now?
right.
Yeah.
So it'd be,
About 3 homes or
Yeah.
3, yeah. On just the corner lot?
If we add them all together,
Yeah.
it will be 3 homes or 3 duplexes.
so now you could do 12 houses if you meet all the other criteria. And that was kind of what I was having problems with as I read it. I didn't really know if that math worked out. You know, they may say your minimum lot size is 8,000 square feet. Or 8,000 square feet, but can you really put on 4 houses and meet the requirements for setbacks and minimum, minimum open space and all that? Because it seemed awfully tight to,
I was going to say this to the end, but I'm going to get into it
Oh.
now. But please remind me to come back to the question of, do we want to talk about zoning districts now, where we have an idea of what this concept is? Do we want to talk now about, yes, we think it's appropriate in R1 and R2 and RLC, or if we want to delve into that? But I did reach out to the planner, the planning director in Winchester back in January, asking generally, what was your experience with this? How many have you had? What are the lessons learned? And again, with the ordinance that we're reviewing now. So apparently it was pushed through by a former zoning administrator back in 2011. They have had 0 of these implemented. And the reason for that, they have a PUD. So they have a PUD district, and that's more popular. People, for whatever reason, are choosing the planned unit development and doing their developments that way. So we don't have that competing PUD, because our only PUD currently is the planned development mixed use. It's only allowed around East Nelson and South Main Street in those commercial districts. So it's completely different situation that we have. So we do not have a competing planned unit development. He also says that some of their best infill to consider for cottage housing is a very poor access, unavailable water and sewer, and unfavorable topography. At some point it may become cost effective, but right now they're using the PUD. And then he also threw in, currently they have close to 3,600 dwelling units in our residential pipeline, entitled but not yet granted occupancy permits.
Wow.
And that's a lot in his, he says, a tremendous inventory of units for a city under 29,000. Entitled means just getting your zoning, your building permits, all your entitlements lined up. They haven't been built yet. They don't have occupancy permits. So they have a lot of units that are approved, just not built and occupied yet. And then to get back.
And not requested either. Not necessarily requested. Those units people haven't said, I want to build.
I think that what they mean is not yet granted occupancy. So entitled, but not yet granted occupancy. I take some of those are being constructed, but it doesn't say how many. I don't know what the percentage necessarily would be in that simple statement.
So this is not just build out, allowable build out. That's not what that number is. This is actually people who have put in permits to build.
These are folks who have put in rezoning requests, subdivision requests, building permits, at least some part of the entitlement process.
Okay.
I'm not sure if he meant that they've gone through the entire entitlement process. Some of them are being constructed, but not yet granted a certificate of occupancy yet. So it's a little bit of an open-ended.
Yeah. I think what you're getting is that some might be speculative, like I'm gonna build it,
yeah.
and then someone's gonna want to buy it, and others are like, I'm gonna build it because I'm gonna live there, but we don't have that breakdown.
Yeah, we definitely don't have
Yeah.
much detail
Yeah.
in that statement. But to get it into the question more, his observation, the zoning amendment had good intent and some really good building design provisions. It was poorly calibrated with regard to how much space it would take to accommodate the needed building footprints, green space, stormwater management, emergency access, and off-street parking. So these are numbers, but we have to be really careful, as the observation is that I'm not sure if everything can fit with these numbers.
Yeah.
So we have to make sure when we go forward that we do our research and have numbers that will fit. And luckily we have 3 lots that we can really say, how is this going to fit with stormwater, with parking, and then do our best to see how it fits.
Okay, so going with his first comment that they've had more PUDs, and then number B down here, that if it doesn't fit in here, you do a PUD instead. Should we consider instead going back to a residential PUD with, as Arnie said, well, I'll start back. Before we redid our zoning, and correct me, before we redid our zoning in 2017, we had a residential PUD or a PUD with no minimum acreage requirement. And then we we modified it in 2017 and made it 5 acres. And then we had a request from General's Retreat and reduced it to 3 acres. So we could do this cottage ordinance, or we could do a PUD residential and kind of build in some of these characteristics, even though with a PUD, you sort of write your own zoning, but we'd say we want some of these things as far as maybe central space. And would that give somebody more flexibility and
I guess it's
better outcome?
depending on what you're trying to accomplish at that point. If you still want true cottage housing as we're seeing it here,
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily water it down. That's my term, and
Okay.
just have a cottage housing. And I don't care if it's a conditional use permit or if it's planned development cottage housing.
Uh-huh.
And then you can still do another planned development residential of some sort if you want to accomplish something else in the residential zoning districts with more flexibility. That's not pure cottage housing concept.
Okay.
So that, I'm gonna go back to our HO. I'll find it quickly. Strategy in the housing 5.3 recommends we explore modifications to facilitate the creation of a variety of safe, affordable, and innovative housing options, including other housing types that achieve higher densities and a diversity of housing options. So cottage housing is only one of those.
Right.
If we have something else where we think we need to allow more flexibility, we can still create another PD and have both of them. Or if we only want this cottage housing, it could be a special conditional use permit, or it could actually be a PED if we wanted to make it a planned development.
Do we get, what, do you think we get a better outcome by being more specific and having all these varieties of
Well, we don't want to get,
PUDs or?
my caution would be, we don't want to get it in their situation where we have
Right.
cottage housing, which is what we think we want and we really like it. And then we have this other thing that's more flexible and the developers end up going there instead of using cottage housing. We also don't have that much ability to do too terribly much of anything. So it's sort of bang for your buck. Do you want to, and I would recommend probably, let's just go ahead and do a cottage housing code,
Uh-huh.
figure out how conditional use permit, is it a PD version? They're going to act relatively the same. Normally you have a rezoning process, you rezone it and you say you want to go to this zoning district, and then later on you come in for your site plan, and then we get the details in the site plan.
Yeah.
The benefit, as you know, in the plan development process is you get a site plan detail early on in the rezoning for the PD. So you see what it is that they're requesting. And you can get that in a plan development for cottage housing, or you can also require that in a conditional use permit. So let's say we have cottage housing regulations and it's a conditional use permit, and we say, you've got to show us in the conditional use permit your design upfront. These lots aren't going to be that big, so it's not going to be that onerous for them to lay out something like this on a half acre, 1 acre, whatever it ends up being.
Mm-hmm.
So what I think I'm trying to say is the process, if it's a conditional use permit for cottage housing or it's a planned development for cottage housing, is going to operate somewhat the same, simply because they have to do that level of detail, because that's what's going to be required in our use and design standards.
Yeah. I guess I could see where we start down this path, and we could see that, this is pretty specific. We might be better off doing just a PUD, but put some of these design guidelines in there. I'm
you're
just worried that we're going to get in the same position, is that this is so specific, somebody would rather do something else than.
I guess my question is, what else in the PD would you be envisioning that's a little bit more flexible than what this is? That might not be a fair question on the spot.
Well, and maybe we take care of it by not so much putting the densities. I want to give guidelines on, this is what we'd like to see. We'd like to see green space built in. We're okay with having not a non-traditional neighborhood where not everybody has their own separate lot, but that it's built together as a plan. And give a developer some flexibility in that, but also got enough guidelines that it's not going to look junky or stand out. And we always have, we always have this either CUP process or the PUD process where we get a lot of control over the review.
I'm trying to think quickly. We have found other PUDs that have been approved in the past in residential areas that are small lot, relatively small lots.
Mhm.
And this may not be fair in the sense that off of Borden Road, there was Stratford Lane.
Mhm.
I cannot remember who started that, and that might not be helpful to y'all. It would be difficult to notice, but if a fairly decent sized lot, somebody came in, wanted to put a Victorian house on the back part of the lot, and on the front part of the lot is a duplex. So that came in through a planned unit development, and that lot can't be more than an acre in size. So as an example of, we utilized our PUD when there wasn't an acreage requirement or wasn't more specific. So in residential areas, we had more flexibility years ago.
Yeah.
Or even if it wasn't in the code, it was administered in such a way that flexibility was allowed. So I'm not sure that that's sort of the type of flexibility you are intending or envisioning potentially, but just to make it as an example, which is, if you haven't seen the property, you might not even notice it because it's sort of deep and you only see front side of one of the duplexes when you drive by. But we have had a number of PUDs in the past where it's strictly residential
Mhm.
and it's more density or flexibility was allowed through that PUD process.
Yeah, and I think if you have multiple houses, more than two, I don't think two makes
Yeah.
as much sense, but if you have a little development, that's what I'm wondering. Are we better off going with the PUD with a little more design criteria? But we can start the process and see, and maybe that's a question we kind of get to at the end.
That'll be a good thing to sort of keep in mind as we're going through. This is sort of, in my mind anyway, this is sort of a package thing.
Mhm.
In other words, we have this idea of roughly double the density, smaller structures, smaller footprint and heights limited, common open space, fairly compact. So we would have to think, other than this fairly packaged thing, what else it is that we would want, and therefore how will we craft that PUD separately?
Yeah,
If
right.
that's the way we want to go.
There's it's a good question, Leslie, to have in the background. If I remember that original PUD zoning, which the part of the logic in the beginning was, since we do have some scattered lots that could be, then you could combine them and then do the PUD and have more units
Mhm.
than you normally would. I think this is kind of a drop-in development that would be specific to certain areas. And also what struck me in here is, yes, you could go with an HOA, but sometimes and it's not always up to us to discuss these things, but to keep them in the background, that this one, it's organized as a condominium. And I think that's an interesting option for us to create condominium properties. And I know from cases I've seen elsewhere where people, I'll use myself. At one point you say, I don't need to be living in a big house, but I wouldn't mind living in a nice, smaller designed unit
Mhm.
that may not be as traditional, may have some of these community aspects. And then that frees up a big house. So I think that's something for us to be thinking about, is also the ownership model, because we don't have a whole lot of condominiums here and options for people, either starter homes or homes at the end of your occupation days. So just to add to the discussion. So Arnie, do you want to go back to talk about the zoning districts?
Sure, if y'all are willing. So in our R1, R2, as long as we meet whatever the minimum lot size is, I would think that this would be, well, I shouldn't say it, I would think R1 perhaps certainly is,
Mhm.
this is a possibility. I don't have a zoning map in front of you right now, so it's a little bit unfair. R1 districts are slightly smaller or generally closer into downtown proper. And as we go out from there, we get into the R2 larger lots. And that's not exactly true, but it's largely true. So you haven't crafted minimum sizes yet, but in my mind, and the closer in you are, the more density you have anyway. And then the further out you are in R2, you could almost argue, well, you've got larger lots. You could actually have more buffering and landscaping from the single family. There's just more lot area available. Generally comfortable with R1 and R2.
I'm very comfortable with the R1 because we already kind of have it. I mean, it's because it's the original area of the city. It's not all same size lots and stuff. I do R2 will be interesting because, like you said, the lots are bigger. It makes sense, but I've been looking at different R2 areas. It'll stand out. Is my
It'll be a
concern.
contrast
Yeah,
between.
so
yeah.
not as comfortable in R2, R1, no problem. RLC, no problem. But
Then going the other way towards RLC,
yeah, I don't see why not.
and then C1, C2, maybe not C2, because we're trying to get something. Those are generally our commercial zoning districts that are more suburban in nature. So maybe we reserve those for the PDMU where we're trying to get something a little bit more dense. So maybe not in C2. C1 is downtown proper, historic district.
No,
It'd be hard to fit that in.
we don't really want housing down. I mean, just standalone housing.
Right.
Right.
Okay. So it sounds like, at least for now, and we'll just again keep it in mind as we go through the process, R1, maybe R2, depending, and then RLC likely.
But if we wanted to do R2, we could put limitations on, or, we could expand the setbacks and
Right.
expand the amount of open space there needs to be and that sort of thing. So it seems like we could work that so that it could work with R2
Yeah, right.
and not make people feel like, well, wait a minute, I built in R2 because I wanted fewer neighbors.
Mhm, mhm.
That's what this chart's doing a little
Right,
bit.
exactly,
Do more of a
exactly.
sliding scale like we do anyway. So, okay, so we'll put that on the back burner and once we start tweaking numbers on what we think are the appropriate lot sizes, then we can see if that would work.
If there are
Yeah.
more questions there, I'm gonna move along a little bit. The next one is about existing non-conforming structures and accessory two-family dwelling units. Similar to accessory dwelling units, we had that section that dealt with non-conformities. What do you do with the garage that's already on the property? Can it be used? Can it not be used? So they're going to make a reference here to the non-conformities. Non-conformities can be continued, generally speaking, as long as they're not expanded or enlarged. So there's nothing new here. Now, this thing about accessory two-family dwellings, I did not go look up what their definition of accessory two-family dwelling units, because in B, new accessory two-family dwelling units are not permitted in cottage housing developments. Again, I needed to go and find out what that is. My presumption there is that is the main dwelling and the accessory. So I don't think you can do accessory dwelling units on top of doing cottage housing because then you're really doubling up on density. So that's my assumption there. I can definitely look into that if needed,
But we could make that a requirement.
that it
Or,
not be.
yeah,
They can't
yes,
have it.
no accessory, no ADUs.
Right, because
And-
these things are about the size of it.
ADU to begin.
Exactly,
Accessory dwelling. So,
exactly.
That also reminds me, I've already gotten a comment from a member of the public in response to that really nice article that was written. And her comment was, please don't allow short-term rentals in these because they're already too small to begin with. And so
Oh.
just keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Moving on to building height, here, and we do generally have the 1 or 1.5 story. I've seen that in a number of these. They're getting a little bit more specific here about the pitch of the roof shall be 12 and 12 and minimum shall be 8 and 12. So that's a fairly steep, not steep, but it's not in the low slope. So generally that's a little bit more expensive, but it's also, most people I think would consider it a little bit more attractive to have something in that medium to high slope pitch.
Yeah, because even in the on A of the intro, the purpose and intent, they're kind of pushing the craftsman look, which I personally love, but you don't want to make the houses too expensive for people to live in, but it's starting to set some design
Mhm.
standards.
And that's a good reminder because I vaguely recall, well, and I actually have to go dig those out. I think Max provided us drawings from either Arthur or when Max came in for his first attempt at a cottage housing zoning text amendment, and then it wasn't complete. And then we haven't heard back from him specifically about another attempt at the code. And now we're obviously moving along on our own. He had a number of units, and we should go back and revisit that just to see when we get to a deeper conversation about density. But those had pitched roofs, at least in that really rough design sketch. But I think he also mentioned something about wanting to do a modern, either single-sided slope or flat roofs. So just to be aware, it's some requirement to have pitches in 12-12 or 8 and 12 would certainly get rid of a low or no sloped or flat roof. So a modernistic design probably wouldn't be included in something with this type of language.
Right.
Variations in building design. Now we get into some of the design requirements, talking about articulation of roofs and just making it be less plain and more articulated or more detailed. The only caution perhaps is that the more requirements that we have for this, and these look really, really cute, but the more design requirements you have, generally speaking, the more expensive it's going to be.
I'll admit, I had to look up articulated. Does everybody know what articulated is? Okay, I was the only one who didn't know.
Townhouses are a good example. You want no more than 3 before you have an articulation where some of the next one is pushed back or pulled forward so that there's some variation in the facade. So it's not just one blank wall. It's got some jutting and recesses and character or interest, I guess, is maybe the best way to put it.
And that you had brought that up, Shannon, about especially the one facing the sides of the buildings facing
Oh, yeah.
out. So if the side or the back of the house is facing the street, you've got to do something there. So that's maybe one place where we will want to make sure we have something firm, and maybe the rest less requirements so that give a little more flexibility, but certainly on the exterior parts.
Do you all feel comfortable being so specific as to say that you can only use wood or cement fiberboard, stucco, standard size brick and stone, or similar? Is there heartburn with going with that level of detail, just out of curiosity?
You're in number 5.
Correct. Sorry. I am in number 5, just as an example, or even in 6, trim may be wood, cement fiberboard. They're fairly specific here.
Yeah.
Question is, what are they looking to exclude?
Right.
That I don't know.
I
Yeah.
presume cheaper looking materials,
Yeah.
whatever that is.
Siding, like vinyl siding.
Right, so that's where I think where we got to balance. What price point are we looking at for them to be able to build versus,
Because our ARB has a set of design guidelines that are very specific for the downtown, much less specific for the residential district. And what you all have so far in the entrance corridor isn't very much. I mean, it's certainly not getting into material choices. So this is an extra step.
Yeah, if you can't include, seems like vinyl siding should be included in there. I mean, it'd be nice to have them all high end, but it's kind of counter to what we're trying to accomplish.
yeah,
I think particularly if you are using, if you have these design standards, so let's say you have that articulation requirement, then the vinyl siding is going to, you're not going to be able to tell as clearly that it is vinyl siding as, and particularly the vertical boards, I've forgotten what they called them. But when you have a vertical board in the corner, corner boards and a board that, you've got the siding going in between them, I think that it would probably look much better.
Because you wouldn't have to overlap. Vinyl siding is a
Yeah.
telling thing where the overlaps of the siding in a larger field
Right.
without the corner boards and where they're fitting into the J channel behind those things.
Right.
So
So I guess I would say that the materials, we might want to consider other materials, but keep some of those design standards so that you sort of as a middle ground so that you still have the look without as much of the expense.
Yeah. Does it sound good to folks? Yeah.
Yes.
I'm gonna point out number 7, it says departures from these standards shall be reviewed through the alternative design process. I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
Just so you know, they have some design process and we could potentially ferret that out. That's another one of those question marks. Covered main entry porches, the next item. It's fairly typical in these to have some sort of that public-private outdoor space, typical porches in traditional neighborhoods and new urbanist design. They really love the porch. So the porch has to be a main function. It's that nice sort of halfway, you're in your yard, but you're on your porch. People walk by. It's that way to engender or create those conversations with your neighbors, as opposed to not having a porch, going inside your house, shutting the door and not seeing your neighbors. So it's not uncommon to have a fairly detailed porch requirement.
So now, is the porch considered part of the square footage of the house?
Good question. We have to make sure in here.
I haven't
I don't recall seeing anything
Yeah.
where it's not, or it's this.
I feel like in the Fairfax one, it said it's not. Am I right? Then
Yeah,
So then you're eating into the square footage of your piece of property again.
right, this one didn't say anything, did it?
Right. I don't think so.
I don't think so either, but it's a good observation in the calibration again.
Yeah.
What do we want included in the square footage? What is not? And then, of course, the amount of each of those.
I feel like we're going to need a matrix that has all of these numbers.
Street facing facades. Again, trying to contribute to the neighborhood with attractive design.
That, yes. I think this is Shannon's section.
Yeah.
I even
Yeah.
wrote it in the margin.
Big
I was,
margin.
yeah, I
Yeah.
liked it.
Okay, lot coverage. We don't have a lot coverage standard, so they're referring here to cottage housing developments shall not exceed underlying lot coverage standards for the respective zoning districts. Other locations or localities have thou shalt not cover more than 50% of your lot area with a structure or impervious area, and we don't have that. That doesn't mean that we can't utilize some of these sort of low impact stormwater development items. Sorry, that's a term, low impact stormwater. So you're not creating as much pervious area. So instead of taking asphalt and asphalting your driveway or concreting your driveway, you use these grasscrete pavers, or you utilize a buildup of gravel so that it doesn't compact so much so that water can't go through it. That's just for your driveway. There's also rain gardens, rain barrels, or other methods for low impact stormwater features or techniques. Cottage floor area. Oh, sorry, that's still in the oh,
Can we,
what's that?
Arnie, before you, excuse me,
Mhm.
just, because this did come up, in our ADU discussion. I think Shannon, you brought it up about a minimum landscape requirement. So I think that's a good idea, and it seems to fit in with an integrated approach to developing these lots. So,
They have a number? for the-
no, in here, it's 30% or 45%.
Right, and basically how big is gonna count, how, the size of that common area that they're kind of all facing, how,
Well, when
you know, they
it
could
says
say,
minimum
here it is,
minimum landscape requirement, and maybe there's a bit, at one point, we need to think about what the definition of the landscape is.
Right,
you
because
know?
then there is separate, common space that you,
Yeah.
so you'd have to-
requirements for that, so we.
Yeah.
Right,
we'd have
yeah,
to
we'll have to
that-
decide, do we need to specify a number, or can we get that with setbacks and open space requirements?
And what is HW district? Do we know? Sorry, I looked for it. I didn't find it.
I'm not sure. No, I didn't look it up, so I don't recall which.
Are we
district.
assuming that we're talking about the cottage?
No, that's a good
Not the-
question. I don't know. That's not in our other chart with the zoning district, so I'm not sure what
Right.
that's.
Exactly.
One of the other ordinances that I looked through definitely had a specification for what is open space. Open space is not the parking area, it is not some of the other things. So they were very specific on what was and what was not to be counted as, let's say you had, and I'm talking about open space now, not necessarily about lot coverage. So it's a little bit different. So we can certainly find other examples as needed and put them in. So cottage floor area shall be designed to be a single story or single story plus loft. And earlier we found that the loft cannot be more than 10 feet in height. So they're trying to keep these fairly compact. So not a full 2-story. And that's, exhibited pretty well in the 3rd Street cottages for Langley. It appears to be all of those have, well, you could argue that the common house, which is the brown one sort of in the middle of that photo, lower middle, that has a 2-story. So that's the again, that's the common house. And I think they have a bedroom upstairs that people can rent out
Right,
for
I guessed, yeah.
This is, I mean, I just say on this cottage floor area where it says these are primarily intended for 1 and 2 person households. I mean, I agree, these are going to be small. We will have some people on council who say we're anti-family if we do that, but we have to be clear on what we're trying to design for.
but most of these are for, well, we had one example in the presentation that I provided where they were on average of 12 to 1,500 square feet, but most of them are smaller or they're in this range. And here we're talking in A1, the maximum ground floor gross area for an individual principal structure in a cottage housing development shall not exceed 864, and lofts can be no more than 50% of the net floor area of the main level. That's generally the range that I've seen, except for that one other one. I can't think of the name of it, but where those maximums were a good bit bigger.
A strange number, 864.
Yep.
Yes.
That's very specific.
I don't know if that's like a version of what 4x4, building materials come in. I'm not sure how they got to that. But again, it's going to be important to sort of calibrate this appropriately for us. But at least we have a starting point here.
Yeah.
And if you desire, we can do that matrix where we go find several other ones and figure out where that is in relation to others. Yards, building setbacks from exterior lot lines. Building setbacks, you may realize that or notice that that's pretty close to what we have anyway. I mean, our R1 setbacks for a single family on a lot is 15 on the front, 10 on the sides, and 25 in the rear, but as close as 5 feet for an accessory structure. That doesn't apply to accessory dwelling units that are detached because that's a little bit different. So at least in the R1 zoning district, this isn't too terribly far off from what we already have.
So with that Walker Street property, Walker, Houston, I looked at this and I was thinking, okay, so that would be 10 feet on the front, 10 feet on the Houston Street side. So 10 feet on Walker, 10 feet on Houston, 10 feet behind so it would be. So is that house or is that property on Houston Street or is it on Walker Street? Because the house that was on it was
AC.
it was facing Houston.
Our zoning ordinance is written currently that the street that has the least amount of frontage is your front. And right now I can't tell you which one, because I think that was a fairly square parcel.
Oh, I think it must be Houston though.
Okay, so if that's the one that currently, without subdividing it further, if it can be subdivided further because it's large enough in the R1 zoning district to be subdivided further, you would take the frontage that is the least amount. So if it has the least amount of frontage along Houston Street, then that's the front.
Okay, so then you would have 10 feet on Houston, 10 feet on Walker, but then only 5 feet between that property and the house that's next to it on Houston. Does that sound right?
Well, we would, if Houston is the least amount of frontage, that's the front. Walker becomes a side. The parallel line on the other side is a side, and then the one towards the house that's further down on
Walker
Walker is a
is the
rear.
back. So that the house that will be most impacted would only have a 5-foot setback. Would have the
Or a
longest lot.
10-foot set.
That would be the side, right? I'm just trying to orient my brain to
Mhm.
a
But
property that
to be clear, Houston would be the front, Walker would be the side.
Mhm.
The other one that's parallel to Walker would be the other side. And I think you're talking about the house further down Walker, so that would be the
No,
rear.
I'm talking about the house that's further down on Houston.
Okay.
Closer to
Second,
Main
gotcha.
Street on
But the
Houston.
one on Walker Street is actually closer to this property, where the one on Houston Street has the driveway down the right-hand side and provides more separation
Okay,
currently in its current configuration.
right.
So that one's actually a little bit more separated from the subject parcel than the one that's further down on Walker.
But they have a longer side.
Yeah.
So they have,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
It will have more
thank you.
potential adjacency to units, yes.
Right.
So we worked hard on this for ADUs, and we might have to go back and visit that,
Mhm.
obviously,
Then
on the side,
I think it also is going to depend on what's allowed in that 10 feet or 15 feet or
Yeah.
whatever it ends up being. If
Agreed.
it's a well landscaped buffer with a fairly significant amount of vegetation,
Yes, I agree.
and then the next one, I'm over on page 13 now, and maybe we'll go for maybe 10 more minutes on this and then I'll let it go.
Yeah,
For
I
tonight.
think so. Yeah.
So cottage housing development and building separation. So it shall observe minimum setbacks from other cottage housing developments. Now, this one was interesting. Well, all buildings within cottage housing shall. So with just within, so cottage to cottage, you certainly want some sort of separation in there. And we have currently 10 feet minimum anyway, in our building code requirements between buildings.
Right.
And
But
then
again, we're
common,
eating up the space. It's like, yeah, God.
common open area. You know, at least 50% of the cottage units shall abut a common open space. All of the cottage units shall be within 60 feet of walking distance measured from the nearest entrance and the shortest walk. So again, trying to find something that is fairly compact. We're also going to have access to the common area and also be not that far away from your parking space. And that's something the designer's just going to have to put together.
I have a question about condos with regards to this. If the houses were individual condo units, would there be exterior space that you rented in your condo or bought?
or
What-
you own in common,
Yeah, the common
What
space.
it's
I
common.
think is in this code, if I'm not mistaken, is you get the footprint of your house
Yeah.
as your own fee simple ownership and a little bit of yard area. That's yours. That's private, yours on the side or on the back. I'm not, or maybe a little bit on the front. And then everything else is going to be in
Everything else
common.
is common. Okay.
So your walkways,
Even if it's a condo.
that's my presumption
Okay.
with how this would get laid out in a condo, because the only thing that you're sharing in ownership is the common areas, and you're still going to get some private land area immediately adjacent to the footprint of your building.
Okay.
Your
Thank you.
tomato plant.
I'm sorry.
So you
I-
can have your own tomato plants right
It-
there,
well,
right?
right.
That's right, and there you are. So yeah, I think
Flower
that's in
garden.
there.
Yeah.
I mean,
Tomato.
I'm immediately taken to the 50-unit condo I lived in Boston.
Right.
And so to me, the hallways are the equivalent of the sidewalks.
Yep.
The entranceways are the common space. So all of the common area was the shared area, which you proportionally paid a fee towards maintaining.
Right.
Yep.
And then in that unit, your porch would have been the outside footprint. That was
Yes,
yours.
in that case, our responsibility stopped what the interior walls. but that's an apartment building.
Okay,
And then
yeah.
once we start tweaking these numbers, like you said, we'll see whether we think the minimum of 400 square feet per cottage, what
Yep.
that looks like.
Yep.
And whether that does it, right? So hard to envision that without
Mhm.
sketching it.
And getting right back into the next item, private open space gets into what we're talking about. So each cottage shall be provided an area of private open space. And they even get into a minimum of 200 square feet of usable private open space separated from the common area by a hedge or fence of at least 36 inches in height. They're getting fairly specific here.
But we do
Don't
like to
like
talk
to-
about heights of walls here, so that will, right? So,
Yes.
but maybe not tonight.
And then tree conservation, it's also a little bit interesting, and we need to pay attention to what is a shall versus what is a should. Some of these seem to be shoulds. Low impact stormwater, where possible, I think was the terminology. So we'll just have to figure out whether or not, because right now, tree ordinance, at least as I understand it in the city, really doesn't have requirements. So if I'm in a residential area, I believe that it's only in a commercial zoning district that you have to go get approval for removal of a tree. But it's certainly not required in a residential area, that I'm certain. So some of these again are shalls or shoulds as opposed to shall, and we'll have to see. It's perhaps not harmful. Well, it's definitely not harmful to have it in here to provide some direction, but we'll have to be really careful if it's a
My phone's coming in my ears. Sorry.
you have to be careful if it's a shall, and then we'll have to be very specific about it. Off-street parking, there are just some on page 15, just some requirements there. What I've like specifically are the drawings that follow that or that are included there to give somebody some indication of where they shall go or should go. Yeah, see already. Because some folks are just going to either put it along the street or maybe not provide as much landscaping. So I think these are good guidelines for how that should go.
Yeah, I think this is helpful.
I'm perhaps a little bit more worried about the fire lane access and turnaround provisions. We can certainly run by those with Public Works and Fire Department. But as an example, that diameter for cul-de-sac of 96 feet,
Yeah,
not sure how that's possible given how much land area we're talking about to begin with. If you're talking about a half acre or 3/4 of an acre and you're eating up with 96-foot cul-de-sac,
I
It'll be a little bit
wonder
difficult.
if this isn't part of why they are not getting
problematic.
built.
So they'll tell us, the fire department will tell us.
Yeah,
Right.
it's like if they can reach it with their truck as long as they can reach it from the road, one of the roads, it should be okay.
They should be able to reach anything right from the street because they could reach it right now. If it was a house at the farthest corner of,
The more requirements we put up for fencing and other things that inhibit someone from reaching. But we'll have to remember, like we did with accessory dwelling units, to run it by the fire marshal and the building official, and maybe even in this case also our public works director, because those seem onerous, those standards.
yeah, big time.
You could, I mean, you could get into trouble like that lot on Thornhill. That is pretty long. And if you only have those two access, one on 251 and one, I don't even know, was there one on the neighborhood in Providence Place?
It
But
was.
Yeah, then you probably do need some kind of fire lane for the truck.
So
to get
maybe
through.
it's about writing into the ordinance that you have to have that kind of access has to be provided.
Yeah, some kind of.
Yeah. I mean, but not that you have to be able to access the entire property or you have to do this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, whatever the fire
I
marshal.
mean, the
tells
fire
them.
marshal will tell us. I
Yeah.
think that's,
And we'll have to make sure, obviously, that they review this and the public works director, but also make sure that they're tied into the review, not just for site plan, because they're giving us this at a rezoning or PUD or conditional use permit stage, and we don't always have them review that. So not only review for the standards as we're adopting them, but for each individual development plan when it comes in. I will also say, observe or share an observation that this is very suburban. Our fire department is already used to working in a more, and this might be laughable, urban environment, but this is an urban environment. So these standards are what you would see for turnarounds and cul-de-sacs in a 100% suburban style development. And I don't know how you could even make one of these with those standards.
Right.
Right.
I'm gonna blaze through the following quickly. We're familiar with exterior lighting standards, probably not so much for heating and cooling equipment noise, so that might be a little bit new. Required separation for cottage housing developments. They obviously didn't want to have too many of these close to one another, so they might be a great thing, but they wanted some separation between the individual cottage housing developments. Ownership and residential use of cottages as condominiums. Then they reference a whole different section of the code that I'm not that familiar with. Are residential use only and may not be operated as transient accommodations. Transient accommodations is short-term rentals, anything that's less than 30 days. So they were quite clear, even though it wasn't implemented, they were quite clear that these were not intended for transient accommodations. And if we do want them for transient accommodations, we'll go through the same process that we did for ADUs and figure out where and how and if we need. An alternative site design, again, I don't know what that means.
If you don't like all this, we'll come in, we'll talk about it.
Yeah, we'll work something
We'll
out.
work something out. That's so.
So is this, well, maybe a question or two questions. Is this an appropriate structure that we can utilize to fill in then our specific calibrated language? Or at the next meeting, would you also like to review the Falls Church just to see something a little bit different? We're not in a particular hurry, so we can take that time if you like.
Have you reviewed the Falls Church? And what's your sense? Are they very
Um,
different?
They're also a conditional use or a special exception, but they're the same thing. And they also have copies. And I'll provide a link. Would everybody like a copy just for?
Yeah.
Yeah,
The
absolutely.
one thing that's a little bit different, it's not as detailed, so we're not going to get some of the dimensional standards and some of the drawings that we have here. And I guess it'd be up to us to figure out if that's good or bad. The other thing that they had, and you'll see this, it's listed as a special, this is listed as a special exception for one particular zoning district. And then at the back, there will be a special exception. So they're going to the special exception of the conditional use permit part of their ordinance and saying these are additional criteria to be used when evaluating a cottage housing development only in that zoning district, because that's the only place. So they have some extra criteria that are set up separately from other conditional use permits or special exceptions. I'm not sure we need to do that. We can just perhaps fold whatever specific criteria that they are into our rules and regulations, and then we don't need to have it in two different places. That's the only thing that's a little bit different than the way we're currently set up.
I did like with this one that we're looking at, the just starting with the purpose and intent, how they laid that out, and then as they went through with each section having an objective, they just kind of worked together as a whole. Everything it tied. It seemed like they were justifying each section in terms of the original purpose and intent statement.
Yeah.
I
like that too.
Right. And so I thought that was, I thought this was a little more put together with more thought as a comprehensive unit in itself. You know, I think, and each little thing, and we can tweak the different things, but I think each thing said, this is why we're doing this. And this is what we originally said we wanted to do. And I thought it worked well. And the details about why do we want this height for a little fence in front? And why do we want the front porch? And I thought it laid it out pretty well. I would wonder if other people thought, were there any big headings missing here? Were there like an Arnie, you know, of all these, each section, exterior lighting and heating, was there anything missing?
I didn't notice
And
anything.
I'm not a professional.
I felt it was a really well-written ordinance.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
clear
Agreed.
and I didn't even, it's so well, I mean, what you said is absolutely correct. I missed that, but that's why it reads so well, is every section you're introduced to.
Yeah.
So
It also provides a lot, it provides that guidance to the developer to, so that they have a better sense of why this is an important part of the design. So.
It's also easier to jettison things that we don't need from something that's already more complete to begin with.
Yeah.
and-
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that what we'll want to do is make that list of things here where we thought, okay, we might want to scale back from some of the specificity, like in terms of the building materials. But I liked this.
Mhm.
And it wasn't too long. I mean, we got through it in an hour, like
Mhm.
going through it like that. And I think
Yep.
it certainly does the job. So I think it's a question of making that list of things we wanted to talk about, which zoning districts and some of the size issues. And I think we'll probably be able to do that fairly expeditiously
Before,
once we get our game plan on this. Yeah. What other people think? Sorry, I talked too much there.
It's good.
I don't have a lot of time left, and I gotta say what I want to
we want to get this one through.
say. Yeah, I want to get it through before.
Well, just to pick up on your point, if you look at the Falls Church one real quick, it reads a typical ordinance where it just jumps right into the standards.
Yeah.
There are no explanations or rationale for it, so. Yeah, no, you're,
Yeah, it's nice.
Would
But
it
this
be,
will be interesting to read through and think about whether there's any aspect of this that.
Yeah.
That we need to think about.
how about we then do that at the first part of the next meeting quickly, just sort of similar
Mhm.
overview of what we've done tonight with the Winchester, but we just do it quickly for the next one to get that sort of contrast, to see if there is something that maybe that is left out of Winchester that we want to pull forward, or just generally for contrast or even comparison. And then we get into some of those other more detailed items. What is it that you would like to see? Is there any different information that you would want? A quick review of others for density, number of units, that type of thing?
yeah, I think going back to their table,
Yeah, I think we got to think about.
this is a good, that.
Yeah.
That's something I think we could work on, and then maybe we can go ahead and update it with the zoning
Mhm.
districts we're speaking of, so that's clear. And
Okay,
Yeah,
so-
I think getting coming to grips first with the matter of density, how many, I think,
Yeah.
right? I think that's kind of the first thing, right? What kind of density do we want, and what can we fit on what size lot?
we will then try to figure out a way of, we'll easily put in our zoning districts, put in some numbers that can be easily amended, and then figure out if we can find you some other comparisons.
Yeah.
Just for number of units, maybe not so much heights and all that, but lot sizes, number of units maximum, that type of thing, just so that you have other comparisons.
It'd be really nice if we could see that for places, a place or two where this has been implemented and where people agree that it's been successful. People are happy with. I don't know how easy it is to find that information.
It'll be fairly easy, and I keep referring back to the
Right.
3rd Street, but we know what the lot size is
Right.
there.
Yeah.
If you zoom out on the aerial, all the other lots still around there are lots that big. They only have one unit on it, so it's a
Yeah.
bit of a contrast, but that's at least a good
Right.
indication of sort of overall density on a lot of X amount of square footage.
right. I
So
think,
we'll try to get some more of those to see. Would it also be helpful, getting back to Gladys' question,
yes,
on the Walker Street property? Under our current code, can the larger of the two parcels be subdivided so we could potentially, in a rough way with our design skills, show you 3 lots there with single family house on each or duplex on each, just to give you an idea of what could currently be done.
Mhm.
And we're not probably going to have the ability to overlay something on top of that, which shows this, but at least you'll be able to see what can currently be done on those 2 parcels. And then we can sort of imagine, as we're going through with this type of code, what could be there.
Because if we could already, I mean, one of the things is if you could already get a good amount of density on that corner, then do we need
Yeah,
this? You know, if we're looking for more, a
Right.
little more density and getting some, you know, do we need it if you can get there what you would anyway? Or is it a question of this would look better and match better than having duplexes or that sort of thing? So, yeah.
I think visual aids are always helpful.
Yeah.
And there's already quite, a few very small homes in that area.
Yeah.
So if you could put on that, I'm just talking this one lot.
Yeah.
Maybe you could put 3 or 4 small houses. Why not just do something like that?
Yeah.
I think you
Great.
get less resistance from the neighborhood.
Well, yeah, that's why it will be good to get a visual to kind of
Yeah.
see.
So we'll try to lay out, and I think you can get 3 lots total there. So one lot's already there. The other lot could be subdivided. So I think you can get 3. So we could show 3 single family detached or even 3 duplexes because you can do a 2-family in that zoning district. But that's going to be pretty standard for what you already see out there. So you already see the houses on their own lot. So if you
Yeah.
can just imagine that coming up the street with 3 more houses. But this is definitely a different type, where there are benefits to this. I'll just leave it at that. There's a reason that people are doing these. Now, when I say these, I mean cottage housing developments.
Right.
Yeah.
And if we have someone who wants to do something like this, then yeah, and as opposed to doing more traditional thing.
Okay,
Okay.
we have some marching orders. We'll try to
Okay.
get something together for the next meeting.
Okay. I think we fold it together as we often do on this sort of thing. It's just fine. The staff report and the commission discussion. So a public comment is open at this point for the same single file setup to the front, and seeing then we will close that. And then we will close off this new business for the time being for the next meeting. And then other business, is there a zoning and planning report?
One thing to mention, John prompted me earlier or a couple of days ago about our comp plan amendment for that section off of Maple Lane that we discovered was in a opportunity area. And there are a number of houses along that right-hand side as you drive down Maple Lane that probably shouldn't be in an opportunity area, where we're encouraging those single family houses to be redeveloped into something commercial. So I have saying contracted with the Berkeley Group sounds more than it is. Because our comprehensive plan was done in InDesign, and we don't have InDesign and we don't know how to operate that software. They have provided us with updated maps. So, and then we had to tweak them a little bit because of a little detail. So we have those back now, and we can start that process
Right.
of advertising those public hearings to amend the opportunity area along Maple Lane, particularly on that south side of Maple Lane. I was somewhat hopeful to have that together with a subdivision code amendment for boundary line adjustments and lot line vacations, but that's taken a little bit longer. So we can certainly do the map amendment just for those parcels along Maple Lane separately. It probably makes more sense to go ahead and do that. So that's where we are with that particular amendment.
Good. Thank you, Reese. Of course, I'm just mentioning it because we want to get all this done before Pat leaves.
Anything to be said on key annual PC milestones? Are we, no? Okay. All right. So that would bring us to city council report.
City council met last Thursday, and this week is municipal clerks week. So if you see Janie, you might tell her thank you for all she does. And next week is police week. And so you can tell the police thank you next week. And we did not discuss really the consideration of a request from Echelon Resources for the abatement. I do expect that next Thursday that we'll have discussion on that and possibly even action on it. And that was really it for the council meeting. But the other thing that happened this week is we are no longer recycling glass. That Earth Magic Recycling told us on Tuesday that they are at capacity with glass and can't take any more. So that has stopped effective today, which is bad news. But
Okay. All right. Our next meeting, I will not be here. We got the high school graduation that night, which I have to attend. So
I will also not be here. Wait, what night is the
The
next meeting?
23rd.
Yeah,
2
I will
weeks.
not be here.
Okay, so that will then mean we gotta make sure we have enough people for a quorum, so just,
What's that date?
that's the
28th?
23rd. 23rd. So just check your calendars sooner rather than later to make sure, A, we have a quorum, and then the members who are here will just take a quick vote and decide who will be the acting chair for that meeting.
Oh,
Does that change? So it, yeah, so,
We do have that CUP coming back for
Right.
courthouse building.
Right.
And then we have an interest court item.
right, signage at Weatherburn, right? Okay.
How many people do we have to have for a quorum?
Four, so as long as two of you are not, two more are not, right? Okay. All right.
We
I
can
move that we
nominate
adjourn.
someone to be a chair in training,
That's a good idea.
future chair.
What did,
Not
what
gonna
did you
be
say,
here.
Shannon? What did you say over there?
Oh, I think it was something about adjournment.
We have a motion on the floor.
Second.
Second, all in favor, say aye.
Yeah.
All opposed? Hang out by yourself. Meeting adjourned at 6:15. Pretty expeditious meeting. Thank you very